Hi, I'm Rigger. This is Your Right, and it's about time we start discussion for Volume 9, just a bit. Before that though, be sure to like the video if you like it, share anything else would like, let me know your thoughts in the comments down below, and subscribe if you want to see more. So, RTX is done, and with the RWBY and RWBY Beyond panels, we've got some stuff to talk about. I know it was a bit quiet, I guess, but I didn't really have a whole lot to say on it personally. As far as the teaser went, my thoughts are pretty easily summed up like this. Neo's hat is apparently magic and defies all known forms of physics. I like the POV shots, but don't overuse them. However, choosing to swap out of it so RWBY cuts into frame was pretty nice. Two Suns? More Star Wars references to add to the pile, but also confirms we're nowhere even remotely close to Remnant. The fact that RWBY basically initially fell with Blake, but she wasn't there in the next place, but Neo was, and then when they fell through the second part of that portal, Neo was gone again on the island, tells me they're going to be scattered for a little bit, which is sort of what most people thought. These big old Patrick stars are kind of a cool addition, but I feel it's a terrible idea to step on one because I can just picture them closing up like a big trap. This cutaway shot to the giant shell was weird for the edit. It doesn't really flow for me, it was just an odd choice, but it adds to the giant stars as being like, oh, there could be giant animals here. Although the trees and stuff are pretty much in scale, and so are what we see next, which is this. Hey look, birds, so life has evolved here past just ocean life and plants, so that's good/bad. Good for survival, bad because we're probably going to be fighting stuff. And what else is there to say? It looks pretty nice, the sand looks better, and that's about it. But we'll move on to what I actually want to talk about today. So yes, we got the video game announcement. I don't have too much to say on it really, but we also got another sort of confirmed announcement that we all sort of saw coming, and if you're on Twitter and that you saw coming, which is this, the Roman Holiday, the Neo and Roman sort of prequel book. So, my personal opinion on doing the story is basically aside for this, which, for the record, I don't agree with. I don't think this is a great idea for a novel, but that doesn't really matter because this actually raises a whole other interesting point for me. Now, obviously, I have no problem with books and expanded materials and writing, of course not. And now this has brought additional questions to the forefront regarding how we handle multimedia in this franchise, especially when all these are canon. Like, yes, this will sort of apply to the video game as well, but these books are way more interesting as far as that sort of goes. Because yeah, the big issue and the big thing with all these books is that it's made very clear that they're canon. In theory, that's fine, that's good, people like canon stuff, but now you need to decide as a company how you're going to handle that, and now we've hit Vacuo, we've hit the point where it's going to start mattering. Now that Neo is separated with them on the island and the other team have arrived in Vacuo, it's actually arrived at the point where we need to care if these books are going to actually matter, and there's a few ways we need to talk about this. Mostly, it boils down to how RT is going to approach this material. See, the issue is, you can never rely on the majority of your audience to have consumed your secondary material, no matter who you are. See, RWBY has a dedicated fan base, of course, but acting as if all knowledge from all novels is known by all people and moving ahead as such is a horrific mistake. To the point I'm hoping that they know that and won't even consider it, because that's actually how you sink a franchise. And I'm not one of those people out there who's saying RWBY is dying or anything, it's not, but you don't make that mistake, and I'm assuming that at least higher-ups and stuff know that you don't do that. It's just a horrific, terrible plan. Option 2 is you touch on any key points, but keep it in the background really, and just slip in a nod and a wink where you can, which is what most do, but it does hamstring your novel somewhat. If something crazy happened, and now Sun wants to murder Scarlet, right? That sounds really interesting, and you could sort of do that if you had free reign of the novels, but the fact of keeping it canon means you can't, because when we meet up again, that can't be the case, and you not explain it. And unless that sort of plot point was planned out to be part of all of RWBY in the grand story of the volume and the rest of the show, you're not going to spend time explaining it because it's not really important, it's just something from a book. And obviously that isn't the case in the books, but it's just an example. So that approach means you need to accept that nothing crazy is ever going to happen in these books, which maybe you like and maybe you don't, but you have to accept it going in. And the other last option they could choose is basically just ignore the books for the most part, which doesn't mean that they're not canon, it means basically you pay lip service. What's canon is that these people are in this place now, you know, Sun and Tea and Coffee, they're in this place, and that's all the canon that matters from your book. Other than that, the events in your novel will just not be addressed. In theory, that's also fine, but the book people still have their canon untouched, but just have to accept it doesn't actually matter. And then what's the point of them being canon then, really? It just means nothing. This is why Lucasfilm eventually just dumped all the Star Wars Extended Universe, because they're not going to keep track of all that crap, and they realized such a minority of their audience actually cared. Now, RWBY isn't Star Wars, but it's just this has happened before to other franchises, and it's an issue you have to address. And really, there is no good decision, it's just what's the best one. However, why this all matters to me is sort of interesting, because I haven't read the two books. I haven't read them. But that is for a very different reason than you might think. It's not anything against the books at all. I love RWBY, I love talking about RWBY, I love theorizing about RWBY, and you'd think I'd want all the canon info. But actually, I don't. Because at least for me, I'm very invested in the show, and I'm much more interested to see how they handle things in the show, and how things are coming in the show. And I can say that, truthfully, I haven't read the books, so they're no influence on me when we review and talk about how things happen in Vacuo. If they leave out important info and characters and background that the regular people watching the show who have no interest in the books would never know, then I will know that as well, because I don't have a lot of that background. That is the way I want it for what I do. But now we have this book. This is going to be, at least in part, an origin story. They've talked about it. Neo's childhood will be talked about here, at least briefly. Probably in flashbacks, but either way. Now I need to pay attention. I'm not sure if I'll read it yet, but that's unimportant compared to how we're heading into Volume 9 and what this all means. The way it works is this. Doing a story about Roman? Sure, whatever, fine, he's dead, it doesn't really matter. Nothing you say about him is really going to change things except maybe how you thought about him if you rewatch the series. But doing a story with Neo, who is along for the ride with the team now in Volume 9 on the island, could have serious implications about what this means a whole lot more than the Vacuo books do. See, Neo's story has been always shrouded in mystery, with only hints and suggestions here and there, which makes it very powerful, or at least potentially. Solidifying it in secondary content, especially one that's in a different medium than the rest of the show, I think is a mistake, but more than that, I think could have some very worrying repercussions for Neo as a character. One is obviously just ruining the character, which is just something you always risk when you're looking into any character, especially mysterious ones. That's just sort of how it goes, especially ones that are well liked because people could react poorly. You always have to face that just comes with the territory in general. So that angle just can't be helped. That is a risk you always run, but something that's more worrying to me than demystifying her totally is robbing subtlety and power from big moments we could have with her in the show. I have talked about before that if Neo dies, let's say, you could have a lot and do a lot with a subtle facial expression or a subtle action that could be really powerful and say a lot without actually saying anything. And, then she passes away. That could really inform you of her past without actually needing to speak or break sort of Neo's mystique, or even show us flashbacks. But you also could use flashbacks if you wanted to do it bigger and more cinematically. You could finally give all the flashbacks at the end and you add it all up and now it's this big complete story in your head. That sort of thing can be amazing. Suddenly it all makes sense and suddenly it all clicks and you suddenly understand this character only just to lose them. That's powerful, that sticks with you. But now, if you do those flashbacks, everything has to line up with the book, or people are gonna be annoyed at the inconsistencies. That's an issue. But more than that, you've also given away what a lot of those flashbacks might be. People are like, oh, she's gonna flash back to this moment in the book and this moment in the book, because I already know those beats, I already know some of what's gonna happen, I'm more informed. So the big grand adding up of events doesn't really click for you. You basically had it spoiled. Now, neither of those things are great, but you can live with them. But for me, none of them are worse or compared to my biggest fear now, which is that despite her position coming along with the team, what they're doing here is actually making Neo less important. In theory, you'd like to think them diving in and giving her a backstory now implies the opposite. That they're filling in some background now so, you can go forward with the character. They've decided to include her in the big story, so here's some stuff you probably should know now that we've made this decision. But I can't help feel it's actually the opposite. Because those character details and changing of perspective on her and learning and growing with the team are things you would want to put on screen on your journey if they mattered. If you were making her a big character and giving her, an arc and big character moments and development, you want to put them on screen and show everyone. But that's not what this is. It's the opposite. It's giving backstory if you'd like to know it, meaning it's not so important we don't really need to see it. That heavily implies that Neo just won't be important despite her being along for the ride. So if that is the case, it changes what I'd expect to see from her in this volume. One option is that outside of the journey there is no real threat on the island, right? Let's say there's nothing bad on the island. There are no big boss monsters to fight that are in front of the gates, there are no things to go steal from people important, there are no characters you need to work with or deal with politically, there's no enemies existing here. So instead, rather than, go into that whole thing and build this whole other world, you drop them into this foreign environment and drop in a bad guy along with them, and that's who they have to fight. Rather than going, oh, Neo's gonna get a redemption arc and work with everyone, no, they just realized they had no obstacle, so they had to drop in an antagonist to deal with along the way. Who's gonna try and kill them, get revenge, get out instead of them, whatever. And either she dies, gets left behind, or she also just escapes on her own and carries on. And that's just horrible, personally. That's really bad, and I really hope they don't do that. If she attacks them as the first time she sees them, perfectly fine, that's understandable. But if that's her role in this whole story, that's a real waste. Other options actually include stuff we speculated previously, like the soul of Roman is here and Neo stays behind to be with him. Yes, Lovely, but it would be stronger without knowing all of the bonds beforehand, so their interaction is a mystery until it happens. We don't know their relationship at all. Are they in love? We still don't know this. Are they in love? Are they like siblings? Are they a wide range of other things? Are they teacher and mentor? Like, what is their connection? We don't actually know. We could answer that with a beautiful interaction. When they see each other in the other world, do they run up and hug and cry like family? Do they kiss? Does one show reverence or silent respect or bow to the other or whatever? You could tell a lot of story. That would be powerful if we didn't know beforehand. So while it's not a bad way to lose Neo if it was done right, this book existing potentially robs us of that hit. And if you don't have that hit, all you're really doing is just losing a character you like because you had the punch taken away. It's one of the issues with the whole, it's the journey, not the resolution. And that is true, but if you haven't given the character a big arc and you haven't had a lot of character moments, there hasn't been a journey. You've just liked this character and seen them along the way, and what you're building up to is the big punch at the end because that's where the story clicks. If there is no story to click because you've revealed it in a backstory thing elsewhere, then the moment just falls flat because there wasn't even a journey to get there, they just ended up there. So how you handle that's really important, and it's not wrong to do that. If you build up to a big moment, that's great, so don't spoil your moment early. Which leads me to another sort of conclusion. Now obviously I could be wrong, these are speculation, but this is just my thoughts with this book happening now. I think we are losing Neo soon. That's something hopefully we've all expected that will happen eventually. Look, she's a bad guy, she's a side character, she's either going to leave the team or die or, be killed or whatever. Like, eventually we're going to lose her as a character. That just seems logical. Hopefully we've all come to terms with that, that's fine. But this book happening now makes me think it's also really in the discussion that we're doing it soon. Because what it says to me is that there was a talk behind the scenes with RT and the people doing their extended material where they decided what stories they were going to make. They even talked about it, where Myers, who wrote the book, said they wanted to do some other ideas that were shot down and they landed on this one. One of those ideas was apparently even Team Stark, and they're like, no, don't do that one. Well, that probably means we're saving it for the show. But that means we're not saving Neo for the show, right? You see how that adds up? Because what that says is we have things to milk from Stark, things we need from Stark. We don't have much to milk from Neo, we don't have much we need from Neo, so while we're here right now, let's make the most of Neo. As they've talked about before, Neo might do things people don't like because she's a villain, and they worry that people might fall out of favour with her, especially the fans, because the only reason she was brought back was people love her so much, so then they worry about souring people on the character. Because yeah, she is still a bad guy. Sure, Yang will be fine, and we know that trying to kill Ruby is ultimately pointless because she's the main character, so we're not worried she'll actually succeed. But it doesn't mean she can't do other more horrible things that they need her to do for the plot or to make a plot. Even with that aside, they also might be looking at the fact that a massive fan favourite like Neo is just ending here soon. So basically cash in while you can. People still like Neo, and either she's going to do something people won't like to turn against her as a character, or she's just leaving the show one way or another. So before people either turn against her as a character for her actions, or simply turn against the creators for either making her do it or just removing their favourite characters from the show, well, let's just sell them something they've wanted since the beginning right now. It means that the people who love Neo can buy it before they're mad about whatever happens. Because while selling her origin after she's dead and gone makes sense, that's only if you completely trust that people won't be cynical about it. People won't go, oh, how dare you kill her, and then afterwards try and cash in by selling us an origin story that you refuse to show us in the show. I hate you. So that's a real possible response. Rather than do that, just do it now before that might happen. Then, you even bet that only a small portion of the audience read the book, so hopefully if you do have a punch planned for her in the show, it still hits for the most part as planned. If I were a betting man, which I'm not because my luck is notoriously awful, but if I was, I'd say that's actually the most likely. Taking away what you think of the show, the books, the characters, the writing, all of that, whatever, it doesn't matter. If you were in a boardroom and looking at the possible outcomes and planning the show on how to maximize profit and what's the safest option, it's certainly this one. Neo is leaving soon. Before people get mad about it for whatever reason, either she's doing something bad or just we lose her, we sell them the origin story now. Yes, we could sell it later, I'd hope for nostalgia, but people might turn against us by then, so we just cash in now before anything negative crops up with the audience who might be the ones who are potentially in line to buy this book. But that is the Neo portion kind of done, but I did say this was about all the books, so let's return to Vacuo books. The other thing that's going to tell you how RT is going to be approaching the books moving forward is what we do with Vacuo this season. See, structure is important, and I have a lot more to say about the structure of Volume 9 than I'm going to put in this video. But what is really going to inform if they actually care about the book's existence in canon is how they structure Volume 9, and if they do what lots of people speculate about, which is a time skip. If you think they will or won't, or even if the trailers show that you think that they won't, it's actually still worth talking about, believe it or not, so hear me out. Okay, so, why does a time skip matter? Well sure, your books can be canon, but being canon is irrelevant if events take place far enough away from the actual plot that those books and their details no longer really even apply. For instance, if there's any kind of decent time skip in Remnant, then the books mean nothing. Sure, the events in them still happen, but if there's been like a year or more time jump forward in the world, and everything's been in motion, it doesn't matter because everything could have changed again very easily. People could be dead, relationships could have evolved or been destroyed, the events surrounding what people do and don't know can be different. People could be in different parts of the world, and villains and positions and actions could have changed everything. So if there is a leap forwards, it'll dictate that their approach to the novels is to basically keep them in canon but pretend they don't really exist because they don't matter at that point. Being canon may be irrelevant if they're going to avoid needing to address any of it in the plot. This actually also applies even if it seems like the events are concurrent because they might decide to pull a little sneaky one on you. The way you do that is show the events concurrently, cutting back and forth throughout the volume. You know, you do a little bit on the island, and then the next episode, halfway through the episode, you cut back to Vacuo, back and forth to split up things and, just seem like things are happening alongside each other. It makes a good comparison. The volume is about how the girls survive and escape where they are, and how the refugees and the rest of the teams survive and, adapt into Vacuo, including if bad guys attack like Tyrion, etc. The volume progresses as such, and in that time, sure, we see Team Sun and Coffee appear, but you wouldn't have time to really address all the details there because there's only, so much time to work within a whole season, and then they're only getting half a season, and they have their own things to deal with, so the fact that they're there is basically all you get. You gotta share all the screen time amongst the island and everything else. So, Volume 9 presses on and everything seems to be normal, until right at the end, where the girls finally escape. They go through the portal or the door or whatever, and there has been a time skip. You're only unaware of it until the last minute. You saw how everyone survived in Vacuo, which answers all those questions, but were tricked, and that actually happened years ago from when the girls arrived back. It was just played that way for a fun little misdirect, and the world is very different than you expect. This is sneaky and kinda clever, and I actually kinda like it. It also does, again, render the books completely moot. Again, it doesn't matter because there was absolutely no point lingering on those events because now they were so long ago they don't matter. But actually, there's more evidence that this might actually be the case, or something along these lines. Because during Ruby Beyond, it was mentioned that Myers may not be done with Team Sun. Okay, so what does that mean? Well, maybe it's prequel stuff, and that's fine, before they went to Beacon and all that. That could be something. But if not, it's also perfect in this scenario because you then have the whole time skip to play with afterwards. Where's Team Sun info fit in between what's happening in Vacuo when the girls return? Well, if you think everything in Vacuo happens up to the same point, but it doesn't, the girls return and it's been years, you have all that time to play with to do more Team Sun books. You could do them without any fear that it's going to affect whatever the girls walk back into so long as major people don't die. That's pretty clever, honestly, and it's probably how I would do it if I was trying to make all these things work. If you're wondering then why I do this at all, it also comes down to how you write the show. Writing a show is incredibly difficult, and if you think otherwise, you just have no idea what's going on. This is always the case. When you start adding in side projects like those novels, it gets much harder. Remembering the canon, the plot, the details, the characters, the motivation, etc. for everyone in a show is enough. Then on top of that, add in everything from everywhere else, everyone else, all these books, all these plots, all the throwaway lines in there that might matter and people will find inconsistencies with, all the extra characters, and it all gets really hard. And you don't want to contradict anything. Plus you got to then do timelines and balancing with all of that. And then you have to do just all your main normal plot to get a normal show made as well. And including in that is then balancing how much you're going to include from that canon and wasting time on things that are backstory, and it just, there's a lot. So, all of that goes into just writing the show, especially when you have these books go into it. So, despite them being canon, and yes, they are approved by the writers, and they generally know what happens, I'm sure, knowing it word for word is doubtful, meaning that how much you're going to include is doubtful. See, one of the selling points of the books is everyone knows that they're canon, because everyone knows that audiences like things that are canon. But them being canon is an issue when you're writing a full show, so your best option is to find pockets, like the Vacuo stuff happening off screen, to write in, so that you can totally just ignore it but still call it canon when everything lines back up again, as long as you don't need references back to it. You structure your main plot in a way that the canon simply doesn't matter when we arrive back at those events. Because think about it, if you had no idea the books existed right now, what would be your surprises when you get to Vacuo? As of right now, the only real surprise you'd have is that Team Coffee was there. You know Team Sun is there, and the other characters that exist in Vacua, like the headmasters and the teachers, you can just introduce them like any other character you've done along the way. That doesn't ruin it for the book people because they already know them, but you don't need to spend heaps of time on them. The only people you might not have known were there with Team Coffee, and they can cover that in one line when they went, oh yeah, we came here after Beacon fell. There, done. All the books and everything covered in one line. That's honestly what I also expect. So even if there isn't a time skip, don't be shocked if that's pretty much all you get. Just one line that's like, yep, we're here now. And all the bad guys, all the villains, all the stuff from the books really don't matter. I want to be clear. This isn't also me being cynical. This isn't about my opinions on the books, and this isn't about the writing of the show or the books. It's just now we've hit that point where these two sides of the RWBY franchise are converging, and it's going to be interesting to see how they deal with it. I think that there's a very good chance that given the books we have and the story we're heading into, that the books are going to be very irrelevant. If you don't like that or do like that is up to you, I just thought it was worth discussing. Either there's going to be something like a time skip and all of the plot back there won't matter that's happened in the books because we've moved on so much further in the time from there that none of it's relevant anymore, or it's just going to be passed over in one line of the show, meaning that despite it being canon, they actually just don't matter and they're not going to address it. And I'm not totally against that approach either. It's a lot better than alienating the majority of your audience by trying to, act as if it's all canon and pretend that everyone has experienced all of this story together and leave behind the people who haven't read the books. You definitely don't want to do that. So sincerely, no judgment here yet at all, but it's the time we find out what they'll do, and the answer to that question will probably be a good indicator of how you and us should treat future projects of this nature. How canon these books will be and what it will mean to the canon is going to tell you what happens when they write the next RWBY book and the book after that, and how much you should probably be invested. It's a good indicator of just how they're going to approach it relating to the show and the rest of the franchise. That may be more obvious to some and not obvious to others who've been involved in bigger franchises before about this issue when it comes up, but we've hit that point, so now we're gonna find out. But, like I said, the fact that this next one is about Roman and Neo, and especially their past, does not bode well, or at least as far as I can tell. Though I'll be very, very happy to be wrong if that's the case. I really hope I'm wrong. But that's all for now. Do you think I'm wrong? Are you excited for the new book? Are you going to read it? Have you read the other books? Do you think they'll address what's in those books, or will they avoid them? Will there be time skips? What do you think? Please let me know in the comments, because as we build to Volume 9, these realities start to converge, and it's going to be an interesting ride no matter which way we go. But until next time, my name is Rigger. I hope you have a wonderful day, and I hope I did alright.